It is here where your English literature journey begins. We begin with a discussion about the Anglo-Saxon period. However, before discussing the beginning of literature, why don't we first discuss the history of the English language? In the 5th century, the Roman armies withdrew from Britain. This was because the Roman Empire was about to fall and they had to go back to the empire. It was then where the Anglo-Saxon and the Jutes, or the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes, which are Germanic tribes, came rushing into Britain. The Jutes settled in the British Isles, but the Anglo-Saxon settlers was effectively the own masters in a new land, and they did little to keep the legacy of the Romans alive. They actually replaced the Roman stone buildings with their wooden ones and spoke their own language, which gave rise to the English spoken today. By the way, the Romans used the Latin language, and there was little effort to keep that language alive. It was because the language was replaced by Old English, which is the language of the Anglo-Saxons. Actually, the 4 days of the week, which are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, are named after the Anglo-Saxon gods. And also, the Britons found it better to use, or found it easier to use, the language of the Anglo-Saxon or the Old English. It's because the words there, or the new words presented to them, are actually words that can be used in everyday use. The Anglo-Saxons also brought their own religious beliefs, but the arrival of St. Augustine in 597 AD converted most of the country to Christianity. This gave a new breed of words, for example, the martyr, the priest, and the font. These are the new words added to the English language with the birth of Christianity in Britain. The early settlers kept small tribal groups forming kingdoms and sub-kingdoms, and in the 9th century, the country was divided into 4 kingdoms. We have Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex. And Wessex, by the way, is the only kingdom to survive the Viking invasion. The reason why we have this much information about the Anglo-Saxons is because of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. It kept all the important events during that time, and it provided a record of what happened during the Anglo-Saxon period. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is a year-by-year account of all the major events of that time. It describes the rise and fall of bishops and kings and the important battles of the period. It began with the story of Hengist and Horsa in the AD 449. The end of the reign of the Anglo-Saxons was accompanied by the death of Edward the Confessor, who had no heir. Harold Godwinson was crowned king immediately after Edward's death. However, Harold failed to defend his crown when William of Normandy, or also known as William the Conqueror, came to the land. Harold was defeated by the Normans in the Battle of Hastings in October 1066, and thus a new era was ushered in. After that brief discussion about the Anglo-Saxon period or history, we may now proceed to the Anglo-Saxon literature. The Anglo-Saxon literature, or the Old English literature, encompasses literature written using the Anglo-Saxon language, which is also known in our time as the Old English language. It was used during the 600-year Anglo-Saxon period in Britain. It started from the mid-5th century to the Norman conquest of 1066, which was led by William the Conqueror from Normandy. The period is a long one. It was generally considered that Old English was spoken from about AD 600 to 1100s. Old English was a derivative of languages of the Germanic and Scandinavian invaders, such as the Angles and the Saxons, which gives us the Anglo-Saxons. It was mixed with the Roman Latin of the previous era. Like what I said, they left a little of the words, or the Romans left a little of their words, because the Anglo-Saxons gave a little effort to preserve the words left by the Romans. The Anglo-Saxon is the earliest form of English, which is now known as the Old English, which is the language of Beowulf. The language of Shakespeare, on the other hand, is different because it is what we call the early modern language or the early modern English. And the language of Chaucer is again another different language, which is what we call the Middle English. The Anglo-Saxon literature provides or gives us a value of, or gives big value to oral tradition, wherein it was because a system of writing was not properly molded, or there was no proper system of writing during that time, which is why they give very big importance to oral tradition or the words of mouth in passing their literature from generation to generation. This was a way to tell their generations of their history and to pass their views of religion on. This was their way of imparting their knowledge to the youngsters and to the generations to come. Many of the poems of the period are pagan, and when we say pagan, these are non-religious or those that do not believe in religion. In particular, Widsith and Beowulf, and Beowulf is what we are going to discuss further later on. Another feature of the Anglo-Saxon literature is that it follows a system of alliteration because, like what I said, it follows an oral tradition, which means that it depended on the words being used. And in order for these to be very much remembered by the people that these literature are passed on to, it is very important that they use alliteration, or the system that binds the verses together and creates a distinctive sound, because they believe that alliteration made it easier to remember the texts. For example, it would be easier for the child to remember the rain, rain, go away, come again another day. It is because there is the prevalence of the distinctive sound, or there's a prevalence of one sound that would make it easier for the child to remember the lyrics of the song or the lyrics of the rhyme. It is because there is a common pattern that they can use in order for them to memorize the song. So this is the same psychology that has been used in relaying their stories, in relaying their literature, which made use of both oral tradition and alliteration. In literature, epic poetry was very popular. The most famous English epic is Beowulf. It has achieved its national epic status in Britain. Another one is Caedmon's Hymn from the 7th century, which is one of the oldest surviving written texts in English. The most important pagan epic poem is Beowulf, and when we say pagan, it is non-religious or it does not believe in religion. So we can expect that Beowulf does not ground on religion. It is also considered as the longest epic, consisting of more than 3,000 lines. The poem made use of the Old English language, or the language that is spoken by the Anglo-Saxon England, or the Anglo-Saxon language. So this is an example taken from Beowulf. It is a part of a book, or it is a piece of the book, which shows us that the language and the writing system being employed during that time is very different from the way we write today. This is because there are almost no words or letters that can be understood or that can be derived from the pages, from the page itself. The author of Beowulf is unknown, and nobody knows for a fact where the poem was first composed, but all we know is that it was created in Britain somewhere between the 7th and the 10th century. Epic tales like Beowulf end in the death of the hero after defeating the enemy. This is because the Anglo-Saxon believed that fate is responsible for death. So in this part alone, we would be able to note how the presence of a god is not preeminent or is not observable in the literature written in the Anglo-Saxon period, because like what I said, the literature during that time are highly pagan or non-religious.